The sun shone over the majestic Buckingham Palace on that summer afternoon in London, but no one imagined that this day would go down in the history of the Royal Guard. The shadows of the Golden Gates danced on the asphalt as hundreds of tourists gathered to admire the changing of the Guard. Among the perfect poses for photos and the excited murmurs of the visitors, one guard stood out in particular. His immaculate red uniform gleamed in the sunlight, the coat without a single wrinkle, the golden buttons shining like tiny mirrors. His black boots reflected the sky like a perfect lake, and his rifle was held with millimeter precision. What no one knew was that in the next few minutes, this same guard, trained to maintain his composure in any situation, would be forced to break his code of silence in the most unexpected way possible. And the most surprising part? The person who would come to his aid would be one of the last people anyone could imagine. The tourists continued to mill about, some stopping for selfies, others pointing and commenting on the soldier's impeccable posture. The air was charged with that typical London energy of late afternoon when the unexpected began to take shape. Subscribe to the channel and give it a like to access more stories like this. Amid the bustling crowd, a peculiar figure emerged, drawing attention wherever he went. Hans, a middle-aged German tourist, staggered toward the guard, his beer-stained Hawaiian shirt grotesquely contrasting with the solemnity of the location. His red eyes and crooked smile betrayed that he had indulged a bit too much in the local pubs. "Hey everyone, check this out!" he shouted in heavily accented English, raising his can of beer as if it were a trophy. Some people around started to back away, sensing that something was about to go wrong. Hans had that kind of confidence that only alcohol can provide. His cargo shorts, full of pockets, swayed awkwardly as he approached the restricted area. Sweat dripped down his rosy forehead, and his disheveled hair danced with the afternoon breeze. The palace security had already noticed his presence, exchanging worried glances with one another, but Hans seemed oblivious to any sign of danger, determined to be the center of attention that afternoon. With staggering steps, Hans approached the guard, stopping less than 2 meters away. "Hey, mein Freund! You must be dying of heat in that outfit," he teased, circling around the motionless soldier. "Look at him! He's like a robot!" Hans laughed, gesturing to the crowd that was starting to form. Some people laughed nervously, while others pulled out their phones, anticipating that something was about to happen. Hans began his performance, exaggerating the guard's rigid posture. "Is this how you stand all day long, huh?" he teased, marching back and forth. The guard remained impassive, his eyes fixed on the horizon, although a small vein on his forehead began to pulse. "I wonder how much they pay you to stand still like a statue," Hans continued, now getting even closer. The smell of beer on his breath was noticeable. He stretched out his hand, as if to touch the golden button on the guard's uniform. A woman in the crowd whispered to her companion, "This isn't going to end well." Some tourists began to go live on their social media, while others shook their heads in disapproval. The guard maintained his impeccable posture, but his fingers discreetly tightened around the rifle he held, a nearly imperceptible sign of the growing tension. The atmosphere in the palace courtyard changed drastically. The casual chatter of tourists gave way to a tense silence, broken only by Hans's drunken comments and the sound of phones recording everything. An American lady whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Someone needs to stop that man before this ends badly." Her comment echoed among the crowd, which now formed a semicircle around the scene. It was at that moment that a black limousine stopped near the palace gates. Snoop Dogg, wearing an elegant suit and his signature sunglasses, emerged from the vehicle. He was on his way to a meeting with royal members to discuss charity projects, but the commotion caught his attention. The rapper watched the scene unfold as more people gathered. Some Japanese tourists whispered among themselves, pointing nervously. A group of British students began filming with their phones, sharing the situation on social media in real time. Hans, oblivious to the presence of the celebrity and the growing discomfort of the crowd, continued his performance. The tension in the air was palpable, like a rubber band about to snap. The guard remained still, but for a brief moment, His eyes met Snoop Dogg's, who nodded discreetly, understanding the seriousness of the situation. The moment everyone feared finally arrived. Hans, in a sudden and reckless movement, extended his arms toward the guard's rifle. "Let me hold it for just a second," he shouted, his fingers brushing against the polished metal of the weapon. The crowd collectively held its breath. Time seemed to freeze for a fraction of a second. A child clutched his mother's hand tightly, while dozens of cameras captured the exact moment when all lines were crossed. Hans, in his drunken state, did not realize the gravity of his action. His silly smile still plastered on his face as he tried to grab the rifle. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and his Hawaiian shirt was even more disheveled after all the movement. At that very moment, Snoop Dogg began to move through the crowd, which naturally parted to make way for him. His steps were calm but determined, his eyes fixed on the scene through the dark lenses of his sunglasses. The guard, who until then had seemed like a living statue, showed the first sign of movement. His fingers tightened around the rifle, his eyes finally meeting Hans's. The air grew heavy with the tension of the moment, and even the birds seemed to have stopped singing in the palace gardens. "Yo, homie!" Snoop Dogg's unmistakable voice cut through the tense air. Hans froze in place, his hand still extended toward the rifle. The crowd turned in unison, mouths agape as they recognized the rapper. "Man, you're in England. Here we respect traditions," Snoop said, gently placing his hand on Hans's shoulder. The German tourist blinked a few times, his muddled mind trying to process that he was being approached by a global celebrity. "Snoop Dogg," Hans stammered, completely forgetting his fixation on the guard. His wide eyes reflected a mix of confusion and admiration. "How about we take a walk and talk about respect?" Snoop suggested, guiding Hans away from the guard with a surprisingly natural ease. The rapper wore a calm smile, but his tone left no room for argument. The crowd watched hypnotized as Snoop led Hans toward a nearby bench. The guard remained in his position, but a keen observer might notice an almost imperceptible sigh of relief. Some tourists began to discreetly applaud, while others continued filming, hardly believing the surreal scene they had just witnessed. Sitting on the garden bench, Snoop Dogg and Hans formed an unlikely pair. The rapper, in his impeccable suit, contrasted sharply with the disheveled tourist in his stained Hawaiian shirt. "You know, my partner," Snoop began, adjusting his sunglasses, "these guards are not just a tourist attraction. They are trained soldiers protecting a centuries-old tradition." Hans, now more sober due to the shock of the encounter, hung his head in embarrassment. I just wanted to have a little fun," he murmured, his voice losing all the previous bravado. "Fun is important," Snoop agreed, "but respect is even more so. You don't need to make others feel ashamed to have fun, feel me?" The crowd began to slowly disperse, although many still discreetly snapped photos of the unlikely duo. The guard continued at his post, but his posture seemed slightly more relaxed. "I was an idiot, wasn't I?" Hans asked, rubbing his sweaty face. "Today you were," Snoop replied honestly. "But tomorrow can be different. That's how we grow, learning from our mistakes. You know what I'm saying?" Hans nodded slowly, the reality of his actions beginning to weigh on his conscience. The afternoon sun began to dip, casting long shadows over the palace gardens, marking the end of one of the most surreal episodes in the recent history of the Royal Guard. In the following hours, social media exploded with videos and photos of the incident. Snoop Saves the Day and a Royal Guard incident became global trending topics. Commentators praised the rapper's diplomatic intervention, while memes of the situation spread rapidly. The next day, Hans woke up in his hotel with a pounding headache and dozens of notifications on his phone. Friends and family from Germany were sending links to news articles about the incident. His face was on all the major British news portals. Meanwhile, at the palace, the guard, whose name was James Bennett, received praise from his superiors for maintaining his composure during the incident. On his break, his colleagues joked about how he had become an internet celebrity without moving a muscle. Snoop Dogg, in his meeting with members of the royal family, received special thanks for his diplomatic intervention. "I just did what anyone would do," he modestly responded, although a satisfied smile played on his lips. Hans, after having strong coffee and 2 headache pills, sat down to write a formal apology email to the British Royal Guard. His hands trembled slightly over the keyboard as he tried to find the right words to express his regret. Life in London continued its normal course, but for a long time people would still talk about the day Snoop Dogg saved the dignity of the Royal Guard. A week later, Hans was back in Germany, trying to return to his normal life in Hamburg. The incident had changed him profoundly. He stopped drinking and began to genuinely take an interest in the history and traditions of other countries. On his desk, he kept a framed front page of The Guardian with the photo of him and Snoop Dogg on the garden bench, a constant reminder of respect and dignity. His colleagues occasionally still joked about the episode, but Hans had learned to laugh at himself. Guard James Bennett received a quiet promotion and became an instructor for new recruits, using his experience to teach about the importance of self-control in tense situations. In class, he often used the video of the incident as teaching material. Snoop Dogg incorporated the story into his shows, occasionally freestyling about the day he saved peace between Germany and England. In interviews, he always emphasized the importance of cultural respect and how a calm approach can de-escalate potentially dangerous situations. The incident also led to changes in the palace's security protocols, with discreet barriers being installed to maintain a safe distance between tourists and guards. However, the spirit of tradition remained intact. In his diary, Hans wrote that sometimes we need to play the fool to learn the most important lessons in life, and sometimes those lessons come from the most unexpected sources.